So let's hear our final speaker for the day from ICS Security Lead at BBA. And of course, we're going to be listening to Ernie Hayden. So welcome, Ernie. Now, he's going to be speaking this morning on a subject entitled A New Approach to Perimeter Security Analysis. Over to you, Ernie.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes. Well, good day, everyone, and assalamu alaikum. I want to thank you for the journey here to the Middle East. This is my fourth trip to the region, but my first trip to Kuwait. Absolutely love the country. It's fantastic. And also, many thanks to Kuwait for the awesome service that they offered to help us as speakers come here to present our talks today. So, aim towards Christie. Now, this is for those of you who are Monty Python fans, this is something a little different. Originally, I was asked to, of course, talk about a cybersecurity aspect for industrial control security. And when I was talking to Christy and exchanging ideas for the talk, there was one that kept on surfacing because of my own experience going to factories, oil and gas facilities, etc. And that is that when we went to see the customer, they would be basically saying, I don't know what I want a vulnerability analysis, so please make it happen. And I'm going to tell a little story during this conversation about how in the world did I wind up with a perimeter security analysis from an ICS vulnerability assessment. This is actually being used for an article that I've been asked to write for Security Management Magazine, which is from ASIS. And I hope to have it published either in June or July timeframe. So we all know this is obvious. Industrial controls are under increased review and assessment. That's why we're here for this meeting. And in my past life at my former employers and my current employer, we keep on getting a lot of requests for industrial controls assessments. And, of course, we say, yes, we'll go out, and we get a request for quote that comes in, and it basically would say, give us a vulnerability assessment, but the scope of work was quite narrow, almost vague, if you will. So our problem is that when we'd be talking to the requester, which is usually either an OT manager, IT manager, CIO, CISO, they would say, okay, we really want a security assessment. It's important to know our position. But when you start asking questions, well, what does that constitute? Well, their focus was pretty limited. We know it's an OT, but we're not sure. We think it's cyber, and we think it's on the production network. Maybe the physical layer, but we're not sure. And then they start saying, well, we want it inside of the factory, or inside the control building at the substation or whatever. But they very rarely went out to the fence line, which is okay. I mean, that's kind of obvious when you're doing ICS. But really the key point here is that there's a tendency to pay less attention to areas outside, if you will, the production zone for the plant. And then when we start trying to even ask questions about that, the comment is, that's got nothing to do with cyber. Don't even look at it. Well, for this model that started surfacing, which isn't really a model, it's something we've been using for the past 3 plants that I've assessed. There's a background information you might find interesting. For the U.S., there's what's called the NERC, which is North American Electric Reliability Corporation, Critical Infrastructure Protection Standard for Electric Utilities. And this standard is extremely important for implementation by just about every electric utility in the United States and Canada. There's 2 elements of this discussion which kind of interesting for surfacing into this review. One is called a PSP, Physical Security Perimeter. Essentially, it's an 8-sided room or an 8-sided facility or the fence line, if you will. And then there's also what's called the ESP, or Electronic Security Perimeter. And I'm going to talk about what that really means to help you understand it better. So you can see on the slide, this is a depiction of what's called an ESP, Electronic Security Perimeter. And it's been fairly actively used in U.S. military, for several years, and now it's evolved into the NERC SIP standards. And really all you can do is imagine is that I have my network built, but what is the boundary of that network? There's no walls around it per se. That's the PSP, that's the physical security perimeter. But how do I delineate my network? Well, the way they do this is essentially they say that anywhere there is a router or a firewall or some sort of a point of external communication, that constitutes the boundaries for the ESP. So please keep this in mind as I talk about the approach we've done for the physical. So what happens is, I'll give you a story. So I went to a fertilizer factory, a major one in the United States, very, very high revenue generator. And the request was, give us a security assessment. Okay, we can do that. So the first thing we did is we went into the plant, inside the physical building itself, started looking at the network, and looking at the components, the PLCs, the switches, the workstations, the HMIs, and started realizing that there were a lot of problems at the physical layer without even taking a look at cyber layer. Cyber was seriously flawed. But the physical area was also bad. Well, as we started walking the system down, we actually went to the plant manager and to the CIO and some of the OT staff and said, come with us, we're going to show you what we're seeing. While we started doing that, we started realizing, oh, there's problems that go through the wall of the building, that go under the fence outside, and that there are ways to shut this plant down without even hacking, so to speak. It's essentially closing a valve, opening a circuit breaker, or whatever. So with that in mind, what we started with, we said, okay, let's stop this assessment and let's take a hard look at what your perimeter is and what the services are that come into inside the perimeter and how we can at least harden these to make it a safer facility. So imagine your refinery or your petrochemical plant or even a compressor station on a pipeline. So first thing you do is you really basically build a footprint. This sounds easier than done. First thing you want to do is you take a look at a Google map or a plan view of the plant and then draw a line around it and say, okay, here's where I'm worried about what goes in and out. As you can see in this drawing, we've done one on the right, which is the aerial view of a factory, and it shows that the yellow line is the fence line, but the red line is around the perimeter of the building. So the question was, once we start doing this plan, I have to make a comment. When we asked for the plan view for one particular factory, the guy said, we don't have one. And my question was, well, what about underground utilities? What about water? What about electric and so forth? Internet, microwave? We don't have any idea what's coming in or out. We don't have that information. The plant's been around for 50 years. We don't have that. So what we want to do is we want to see what crosses these lines. So take a look at the field and of the plant, look at this plan view we've just drawn, and then try and identify what are the underground services, airborne services, which I'll talk about shortly, and any surface threat vectors, such as cars going in and out of the plant, trains, etc. Take a look at tangible items as well as invisible items. And invisible could be Wi-Fi, microwave, radio. So what do you consider when you do this analysis? Well, you have people that go in and out of your facility. How do they come in and out? Where do they go in and out? What about trains? What about large trucks? What about product feeds, such as, for example, a pipeline that comes into your terminal over here on the Gulf? What about deliveries, FedEx, UPS, DHL? How do they come in and out of your facility? Because they are a threat vector. Outbound shipments, how do I move things out of my facility? How about electronic signals that cross the perimeter, such as Wi-Fi, cellular, radio, 800 megahertz could be an example, satellite, microwave. And then what about all the services that feed your facilities, such as your refinery or petrochemical plant? Electric, natural gas and propane, water, which could be your potable water, your fire water for fire suppression, sewer, enterprise and public fiber, telephone services, cable TV, and service air and commercial gases. I think I'll give you a sense of what we're trying to do is identify what goes in and what goes out within your perimeter. Well, one that was continuing to surface more and more, and I'll probably talk about this afternoon on the panel, the expert panel, is also the abnormal airborne threats such as drones. That is another threat to just about any plant right now, especially because it's fairly easy to move a small airborne device over the fence line and cause damage. So the key points when you do this. Number one, you have to think like an attacker. We've heard that theme yesterday. We're hearing it today. You've got to think like, how am I going to attack your facility, and what kind of damage can I cause by simple approaches? We're not talking esoteric, fantastic hacking yet. We're talking about simple stuff. And like I say, this is not a simple exercise, because some of the facilities I've been to, you ask for a plan view of the plant or show me all your underground services. They can't do it. They just don't have that information. And the person who was involved with the underground services, for example, when the plant was built, is retired and living in Miami or someplace else. So you really don't have that knowledge in-house. And then also, you don't have any owners of this, because I'm the CIO or I'm the OT manager or whatever, but it's not my job to understand where all these services are. Even some of the facilities people don't have that. The other thing you have to look at when you're thinking about this is dual feeds. For example, if you go to like a well-built data center, it's going to have dual feeds for electricity, it's going to have dual feeds for internet connectivity and so forth. So don't just think you see where one comes in across your boundary, when you have to take a look and say, where is another one? Is there a secondary that I should be aware of? And we haven't even walked the perimeter yet, so when you get ready to go out and walk the perimeter, you have to start thinking about what can I expect to see when I go out there. Because remember, you're thinking like a hacker or an attacker, and then secondly, you have a good sense from the data you've received what to expect. But what surprises are you going to see when you go out and look at the perimeter? So, a couple examples just to give you a sense of how easy this is, but actually it's amazingly surprising to some of our customers. Was at one factory, basically started doing this particular assessment, saw a lot of problems, and when we started doing the walk down to the perimeter, I got to the fence line and said, what's that building over there? What is that building doing right there? That building was a potable water supply to the factory. It was one line, it had two valves in it that were in series, and the door to the building was opened and unlocked, and this picture is to show you the position of the lock. So as a bad guy and thinking about it as an attacker, it was very simple for me to go inside the building, shut the valve, and lock the valve shut if there were a chain or a cable available, and then leave. Or I could leave and lock the door, and it would slow down a response. In this case, this water supply was a single point of failure. It provided potable water, service water, fire suppression water, and the factory would be shut down. And it was untended, unguarded, outside the fence line, so it was outside of the perception of security boundary for this facility. Another example that we've seen is trespassing Wi-Fi. Remember I talked about invisible items that are crossing the barriers. When we go out and do some of our assessments, we'll also walk through and do what we call war walking, where you're looking for Wi-Fi signals within the facility as well as within the fence line. Now, one of the things you're trying to do is detect what is the Wi-Fi. Some of it's there for a reason. It might be secure, it might be protected. And especially with the IoT approach, there's a lot more Wi-Fi systems being installed with these sensors. But on the other hand, we kept on finding in several cases rogue or unknown, unowned Wi-Fi services. So as a result, if I'm sitting in the plant, I can connect to the internet with a device and surf the internet without any control. But that's not so dangerous. What I worry about is bringing in viruses, malware, and so forth through that Wi-Fi service that I really don't know what it's there for. So as I've discussed, it could be not only you have the bad guys on the outside, but also these could be rogue access points installed inside the factory because employees found that the current networking opportunities were too difficult. The third thing, this slide's a little bit obfuscating some things, but the third thing we find on some of these assessments is that there's signage left, for example, on vault covers, on particular signage adjacent to some of these services that are letting the attacker know the criticality of the particular point. In this case, I was out looking at a particular center in Seattle where I live, which is essentially it's a carrier hub, a carrier hotel. And if you look around the street on the sidewalk, there were signs such as electric there, water meter here, and so forth. As I teasingly said to the ASIS folks as I was writing the article, I basically said this is a nice indicator to an attacker to say plant bomb here, because that's the way they could make a difference, and this is all outside the perimeter. So maybe take a look at your telltales and get rid of them, or at least figure out a way to say, okay, fire department, you need to know where this facility is, or this service cutoff is, but at least I'll give you a code rather than a big sign that says, here's the problem, plant bomb here. Well, like I say, I'm a cyber person by background. That's how my work is. I also do a lot of work in physical security. And what I found is that I kind of asked myself, well, what's the value of this? You know, I'm here for a cyber conference, but I've just told you how to think about your physical security perimeter. Well, first of all, one thing is this: we use this technique now to help our customers understand what they want us to look at. Because remember, earlier I was indicating that the customers were saying, I want a cybersecurity vulnerability assessment, but I really don't know what that means. So this is a technique that helps. Secondly, this really improves awareness as to what's crossing these boundaries, both visible and invisible. The third part of it is, and especially at two of the factories that I've been at, they realized that they had a huge gap in knowledge on their underground services as well as dual feeds they had that they weren't aware of, which was quite shocking and dangerous if you're trying to isolate electrical power. Also, it enhances the planning for different types of attacks. So, if you know, there's a program that's called, or a certification called Critical Ethical Hacker, which I happen to hold. It's a real one. And the thing that's good about it is it helps you understand how an attacker thinks so you can defend yourself better by hardening your systems. Well, in this case, we've actually done that by helping them look at attack vectors and attack planning methodologies that they can harden. And then the last part was, which was kind of the surprise one even for me, was improving awareness of the telltales for the attackers. Get rid of the signs that say plant bomb here. This happens to everybody. My last slide said Shukram, and I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I still have 6 minutes left, so either I didn't do this right or I talked too fast.
Ernie is in. Yes, we have time for some Q&A. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got some questions, may I have a raise of hands? Give us your name, your company, and your question. I'm going to kickstart off, Ernie. Yes, we do have a question. Many thanks. Your name, your company, and your question, please.
Dana Winner, my own company, Dana Winner Incorporated. What else? That was it? Okay. My question is, once you go through this very good process of demonstrating to the client the importance of cybersecurity and physical security being looked at holistically, what is your recommendation to them, how they reorganize themselves internally to ensure that they go on with that?
Thank you for the question. I can give a story to that will help answer this, but in particular, I want you to understand is we still do a cyber assessment as part of this approach. So I was just narrowing down to physical. We will provide a report which lists our recommendations and suggested actions, and we try and break it down by different levels of risk, so from critical to high, medium, low, and informational. So the end result is basically a report, and we try to avoid giving you 1,000 things to fix. We'll give you 10 things to fix, but they're really, really important. In the case of organizational, this one company that we were working with, after we were going through this process, the IT manager and the OT manager were at odds. They weren't very friendly to each other, and we had to referee some conversations. Well, one of the things that was recommended was take a look at how you can bring a project manager from the IT side over to the OT side to help with implementation of projects and vice versa. OT didn't have enough staff to do that. IT did. So subsequently, what they did is they brought an IT project manager over to work with OT for several projects, including some of the remediation of the findings. And it was a great exchange of knowledge, awareness, and it made people realize that both sides were not the enemy. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Well, thank you again.
We have one more question, please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Vivian L. from Emerson. My question is just, in your OT systems, what's the most likely vulnerability that you find, or what's the most common vulnerability that you normally find?
Yes, so I'll try and address it in two ways. And I was talking to Dale Peterson about this the other day. The first thing we find is that people come in assuming a complexity of problems. I mean, like for example, we've all heard some great discussions about, different protocols in use and so forth, but what we've continually found is that the most people we talk to on ICS security are not very sophisticated as far as implementation. So if you start with simple, it works pretty well. So the first thing we have found repeatedly was gross failures in the physical layer. We're talking about, servers stuffed in a little room that overheats, stacks of switches on tops of 2x4s that are subject to high temperature and possibly catching on fire, being knocked over. I mean, it's simple things. So that's probably the biggest vulnerability we find right away. And then the other part is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi tends to be so pervasive, it's very, very easy to take advantage of it. Now, I'm simplifying, but that's what we're finding with our customers, not so much the sophisticated one. I would love to go to one where I'm really looking hard for problems. Okay, thank you so much.